He thought she was just another woman he could intimidate, just another face he could silence with his badge. But he had no idea who he was dealing with until she took him to court and shattered his illusion of power. The highway stretched out under the dim glow of streetlights, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the quiet outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. It was late, almost midnight. The air was heavy, humid, pressing against the windows of the lone car making its way down the deserted road. Jessica Thompson was exhausted. Her shoulders ached from the long day at the office and her eyes were heavy, blinking away the fatigue. She just wanted to get home, to sink into her bed and let the day disappear behind her. Her silver sedan hummed along the pavement, the soft rhythm of jazz flowing through the speakers, helping her stay awake. She didn't stand out. In her jeans and plain white blouse with her dark hair tied back in a low bun, Jessica looked like just another woman heading home. Nothing about her hinted at the fierce, brilliant mind hiding behind those tired eyes. Nothing that would have warned him of the storm she was capable of unleashing. Then she saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror, red and blue, closing in fast. Her chest tightened, her fingers gripping the steering wheel just a little harder, not out of fear, but out of frustration. She knew how this worked. She had seen it before, too many times, but tonight she was too tired for this. She flicked on her signal and pulled over, letting her car roll to a stop on the shoulder. She took a deep breath, keeping her hands where they could be seen. Calm, steady, controlled. The way she had practiced so many times before. The patrol car stopped behind her, headlights flooding her mirrors. A tall figure emerged, moving slowly, deliberately, like a man who was used to being obeyed. Officer Ryan Caldwell, a name well known in this part of town. 41 years old, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with a face that wore an air of smug authority. He walked with heavy steps, boots scuffing against the gravel as he approached her window, one hand resting on his belt, the other holding a flashlight that flicked on as he reached her door. Jessica watched him through the side mirror, her face carefully blank. She could see his expression, impersonal, cold, his eyes sweeping over her car before settling on her. "License and registration," he demanded, his voice flat, practiced. No greeting, no explanation. Jessica kept her movements slow and deliberate, reaching into the glove compartment for her documents. "Was I speeding, officer?" she asked, her voice steady, neutral. Ryan's gaze didn't waver. "Taillights out," he answered, his tone dismissive, already shifting his attention to the papers in his hand. Jessica's brow furrowed. "That can't be right. I had them checked just last month." Ryan's eyes flicked back to hers, his jaw tightening. "Are you arguing with me?" There it was. That challenge, the one that he expected her to back down from, the one that had silenced so many before her. Jessica held his gaze, her face calm, her eyes unwavering. "No, sir, just stating a fact." Ryan's nostrils flared, his shoulders squared. "Step out of the car." Jessica felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her composure. "May I ask why?" Ryan's mouth twisted into a half smile, a cold, mocking curve of his lips. "Because I said so." For a second, neither of them moved. The night was silent around them, the distant hum of traffic barely audible. Jessica knew that this wasn't about a taillight. It was about control. It was about power. She took another breath, slow and steady, before unbuckling her seatbelt and opening the door. The night air was heavy, warm against her skin as she stepped out, standing straight, her posture calm but firm. Ryan took a step back, looking her up and down, sizing her up. She could feel his eyes lingering, searching for any sign of fear or weakness. "Turn around! Hands on the car!" Jessica hesitated, her jaw tightening. Under what grounds? Ryan's expression darkened, the condescending smirk disappearing. "Are you resisting?" She felt the shift in the air, the crackle of tension, the unspoken threat. She had seen it before, too many times. But she also knew her rights, and she knew this was wrong. "No, officer, I'm cooperating. I just want to understand the reason." Ryan's fingers twitched, brushing against the cuffs on his belt. "Last chance, turn around or I'll arrest you for obstruction." Jessica could feel the blood rushing in her ears, but her face stayed calm, controlled. She turned slowly, placing her hands on the roof of her car, feeling the cool metal against her palms. Ryan moved behind her, his movements sharp, almost aggressive. His hands were rough as he yanked her wrists back, snapping the cuffs on too tight, the metal biting into her skin. She bit the inside of her cheek, refusing to let out a sound, refusing to give him the satisfaction. "You know, you should have just kept your mouth shut," Ryan muttered, his breath hot against her ear as he shoved her toward his patrol car. "Would have made things a lot easier." Jessica kept her head high, her shoulders back. She didn't fight him, but she didn't cower either. Ryan pushed her into the back seat, the door slamming behind her with a heavy thud, sealing her in. She sat there, hands bound behind her, her heart pounding in her chest. But her eyes were sharp, focused, her mind already racing. This wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had been in the seat before her, and every person who would be here after her if no one fought back. Ryan thought he could silence her, thought his badge made him untouchable. He was wrong. This was far from over. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to receive more stories like this, leave a like, and comment to help this story reach more people. Your support helps raise awareness about the fight for justice. Now, let's get back to the story. The patrol car pulled into the station, its flashing lights reflecting off the brick walls as Officer Ryan Caldwell parked in a reserved spot near the entrance. He killed the engine, his smug expression unchanging as he turned to look at Jessica through the metal partition. "Welcome to your new home for the night," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Jessica didn't respond. She sat still, her wrists throbbing from the cuffs digging into her skin, her jaw clenched but her eyes unwavering. She watched his every move, noting his arrogance, the way he carried himself like he was untouchable, like he was invincible. The door swung open and Ryan grabbed her arm, yanking her out of the back seat with unnecessary force. Jessica stumbled but caught herself, straightening her shoulders, refusing to show weakness. "Watch your step," he mocked, guiding her roughly toward the entrance. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh, buzzing overhead as they walked through the station's corridors. The air was cold, sterile, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant. A bored-looking desk sergeant glanced up, his eyes flicking to Jessica before returning to his paperwork, completely indifferent. Ryan led her to a small room with dull gray walls and a metal bench bolted to the floor. He shoved her inside, uncuffing her just long enough to push her down onto the bench before snapping the cuffs back on, even tighter than before. Jessica's wrist burned, the cold metal biting into her skin. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Ryan leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms as he looked down at her. His face was smug, confident, his eyes cold and calculating. "You must think you're real special, huh?" He taunted, his voice low and mocking. thinking you can mouth off to me and get away with it." Jessica looked up at him, her expression calm, controlled. "I just asked a question." Ryan's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "You questioned my authority, and that's why you're here." Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line. So, he admitted it. It wasn't about a broken taillight. It was about his ego. He leaned in closer, his face just inches from hers. "Here's how this works. You sit there, keep your mouth shut, and wait until I decide you've learned your lesson." Jessica's eyes locked onto his, unwavering. "You can try to intimidate me all you want, but we both know this is illegal." Ryan's face darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. He straightened, his shoulders rigid as he glared down at her. "You think you're smart, huh?" Jessica didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence was defiance enough. Ryan scoffed, shaking his head. "You'll learn. They all do." With that, he turned and walked out, the heavy door slamming shut behind him, the lock clicking into place. Jessica exhaled, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. She glanced around the room, bare walls, a single flickering light overhead, the cold metal bench beneath her. It was designed to break people down, to make them feel small and powerless. But Jessica wasn't breaking, not tonight, not ever. She shifted her wrists, feeling the sharp bite of the cuffs against her skin. Her fingers tingled as the circulation was cut off, but she gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay calm. "Control your breathing. Control your mind." She closed her eyes, letting the noise of the station fade away. She could hear faint voices outside, the murmur of officers laughing, the occasional ring of a phone. But none of it mattered. Her focus was on what came next. Because this wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had sat on this bench before her. Every person who had been silenced, humiliated, and broken by men like Ryan Caldwell. She wasn't going to let that continue. Jessica's mind began to race, going through every detail of the night, every word, every movement, every expression on Ryan's face. She remembered the way he smirked, the way his eyes flashed with anger when she didn't back down. He was arrogant, careless. He thought his badge made him invincible. He was wrong. Jessica felt a spark ignite within her, a burning sense of purpose that drove away the exhaustion, the frustration, the fear. She knew what she had to do. She would fight this, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered at the hands of men like him. The door opened suddenly, breaking her train of thought. Another officer walked in, shorter, older, his hair graying at the temples. He glanced at her, his face blank, then looked down at his clipboard. "Jessica Thompson?" he asked, his voice monotone. "That's me," she answered, her tone even. He looked up, his eyes lingering on her for a moment before nodding. "You're being booked. Fingerprints, mugshot, the works. Let's go." Jessica stood, her shoulders back, her head high. She walked out of the room without looking back, her steps steady, her resolve unshaken. As she followed the officer down the hallway, she could feel the eyes on her, curious, indifferent, judgmental. It didn't matter. She wouldn't be humiliated. She wouldn't be broken. They went through the motions, fingerprints, photos, paperwork. The officer was quiet, efficient, not meeting her eyes as he processed her. Jessica watched him closely, noting his robotic demeanor, the way he avoided looking at her for more than a second. He was part of the system, a cog in the machine, just another piece of a broken, corrupt institution. When it was done, she was led to a holding cell, a small, cold room with metal bars and a single bench. The officer unlocked the door, motioning for her to enter. Jessica stepped inside, turning to face him as he locked the door behind her. Their eyes met for a split second, and she saw something there. Hesitation, guilt, maybe even shame. Then he looked away, his shoulders slumping as he walked back down the hallway, his footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. Jessica sat on the bench, her back straight, her eyes sharp. She didn't feel defeated, she felt determined. Ryan thought he had won, thought he had put her in her place, but he had no idea what he had just started. She wasn't staying silent, she wasn't backing down. And when this was over, he would regret ever thinking his badge made him untouchable. The cold metal bench pressed into Jessica's back as she sat in the holding cell, her eyes fixed on the barred door. She heard muffled voices echoing down the hallway, punctuated by the occasional laugh. The station felt like a fortress, built to protect men like Ryan Caldwell. Men who believed they were above the law. But Jessica wasn't intimidated. She was calculating, remembering every detail, every word he had said. Her mind was already piecing together her defense. No, not just her defense, her counterattack. Hours passed. Her muscles ached, wrists sore from the cuffs that had been too tight for too long. She leaned her head back, eyes closed, controlling her breathing. She needed to stay sharp, focused. Then she heard footsteps, slow, heavy, the unmistakable rhythm of arrogance. Ryan appeared in front of her cell, arms crossed, that same smug smirk plastered on his face. Comfortable, he mocked, his voice dripping with condescension. Jessica looked at him, her expression neutral. "I've been through worse." Ryan's eyes narrowed. He wasn't expecting defiance. He was used to fear, to submission, to people breaking under his authority. He took a step closer, his fingers curling around the cold metal bars. "You think you're smart, huh? Think you're going to get out of this?" Jessica's lips curled into the faintest smile. "I don't think. I know." Ryan's jaw clenched, a flicker of anger breaking through his mask of control. He leaned in, his face inches from hers. "You don't get it, do you? I run this town. I can make you disappear and no one will ask questions." Jessica's eyes hardened, her posture unyielding. "You think you're untouchable, but even men like you fall, especially men like you." Ryan's nostrils flared, his fists tightening at his sides. "Careful," he hissed, his voice low and menacing. "Your mouth is what got you here. Keep it up, and I'll make sure you regret it." Jessica didn't flinch. She met his gaze head on, her voice cold and steady. "The only one who's going to regret this is you." For a moment his eyes flickered, uncertainty, doubt, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He straightened, that smug grin returning. "We'll see about that." Without another word, he turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Jessica watched him go, her fists clenching at her sides. She could feel the anger burning in her chest, the injustice tightening like a knot in her throat. But she wouldn't let it consume her. She needed to stay focused, stay smart. She turned her attention to the room around her, taking in every detail. The security camera in the corner, the crack in the wall by the door, the echo of voices from the front desk. Everything was a piece of the puzzle. Then she remembered something. A flash of memory from the arrest. The way Ryan had avoided standing in front of his patrol car. The way he had kept to the side, out of the camera's line of sight. A slow smile spread across Jessica's face. He was hiding something, and she was going to find out what. Hours later, the cell door swung open, and an officer she hadn't seen before stepped inside. He was younger, nervous, his eyes flicking around the room before landing on her. "You're being released. Charges were dropped." Jessica stood, her face calm, controlled. But inside, her heart was pounding. Dropped? Why? How? She walked out of the cell, her posture rigid, head held high. Ryan was nowhere to be seen, but she could feel his presence lingering, his shadow haunting the station. At the front desk, her personal items were returned: wallet, phone, car keys. As she pocketed them, the young officer hesitated, his eyes dropping to the floor. I'm sorry," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Jessica looked at him, her eyes sharp. "You knew this was wrong, didn't you?" He swallowed hard, his face paling. I don't have a choice. Caldwell, he runs things around here." Jessica's jaw tightened. The fear in his eyes was real, tangible. Ryan's power went deeper than she had realized, but that only strengthened her resolve. She stepped outside, the cool night air washing over her, clearing her head. Her car was still there, parked where she had left it, untouched, unharmed. She sat behind the wheel, her fingers wrapping around the steering wheel, her mind racing. Ryan was careful, calculated. He knew how to manipulate the system, how to erase evidence, how to silence witnesses. But she wasn't a witness. She was a fighter, and she wasn't done yet. Jessica drove home in silence, her thoughts swirling like a storm. She knew what she had to do. She needed proof, evidence that couldn't be erased or rewritten. As she pulled into her driveway, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and felt her heart skip a beat. A text from her best friend, Rachel. "I saw everything. I have the footage. Call me." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Footage. Rachel must have seen the arrest, recorded everything, the proof she needed. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number, her heart pounding in her chest. Rachel answered on the first ring. "I saw the whole thing." Rachel's voice was tight, angry. "He was way out of line. I recorded everything from my dash cam. It shows him pushing you, the way he talked to you, everything." Jessica closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "You have no idea how much this means." Rachel's tone softened. "I couldn't just stand by and watch. He's been doing this for years. It's time someone stopped him." Jessica's resolve hardened. "That's exactly what I plan to do." They talked for hours, going over every detail, planning every step. Jessica knew she had to be smart, careful. Ryan wouldn't go down without a fight, but she wasn't afraid. She ended the call and sat in the darkness, her fingers tightening around her phone. She had the proof, she had the determination, and she had a plan. Ryan Caldwell thought his badge made him untouchable, thought he could break her, silence her. But he was wrong, and Jessica was about to show him just how wrong he was. This was just the beginning. The morning sun was harsh as it filtered through the tall windows of the courthouse in downtown Atlanta. The air inside was heavy, thick with anticipation and curiosity. Reporters clustered outside, their cameras ready, their voices buzzing with speculation. Jessica stood at the front of the courtroom, her posture poised, her chin held high. She was dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, her hair neatly pulled back. There was no trace of fear in her expression, only resolve. Beside her, her attorney Michael Green shuffled through a stack of papers, his face focused and serious. Michael was known for his relentless pursuit of justice, a lawyer who didn't back down from a fight, no matter how powerful the opposition. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and the room fell silent as Ryan Caldwell entered. His shoulders squared, his jaw clenched. He was in uniform, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his gun holstered at his side. He looked every bit the part of a respectable officer of the law. But Jessica knew better, and soon everyone else would too. Ryan walked with an air of confidence, his eyes cold as they met Jessica's across the room. He was used to control, used to bending people to his will with just a glare. But today, his power was slipping. He took his seat at the defendant's table, his lawyer whispering something in his ear. Ryan's face was stone, but Jessica could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed restlessly against his leg. The judge entered, his black robe flowing behind him as he settled into his chair. Judge Samuel Turner was known for his fairness, his reputation untainted by bias or influence. He looked over the courtroom with a weary expression, then banged his gavel. "Court is now in session," he announced, his voice echoing through the room. "We are here to hear the case of Jessica Thompson versus Officer Ryan Caldwell on charges of unlawful arrest, misconduct, and abuse of power." A murmur rippled through the audience, a wave of whispers and exchanged glances. This wasn't just another traffic stop case. It was an accusation that could shatter a career. Michael stood, his presence commanding. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that Officer Caldwell abused his authority, violated protocol, and unjustly detained my client, Jessica Thompson, in an act driven by ego and prejudice, not by law." Ryan's lawyer shot to his feet, his voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense asserts that Officer Caldwell acted within his legal rights and followed standard procedure during the traffic stop." Judge Turner raised a hand, his gaze steady. "The evidence will decide that. Continue, Mr. Green." Michael nodded, his face calm. "Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Jessica Thompson to the stand." Jessica stood, her heart steady, her steps firm as she walked to the witness stand. She was sworn in, her eyes never leaving Ryan's face. She saw the flicker of arrogance, the cold disdain. He still thought he was invincible. He was wrong. Michael approached her, his tone respectful. "Jessica, can you describe the events of the night you were arrested?" Jessica took a breath, her voice clear and unwavering. "I was driving home late at night when I saw the flashing lights in my rearview mirror. I pulled over immediately and complied with all of Officer Caldwell's orders. But his demeanor was hostile. He was aggressive, confrontational. When I questioned the reason for the stop, he escalated the situation without cause." Michael nodded, his expression solemn. "Did you resist his commands?" "No," Jessica replied, her gaze steady. "I followed every instruction. I kept my hands visible, I spoke calmly, and I did not raise my voice." Michael's eyes flicked to the jury, making sure they absorbed every word. "And yet, he arrested you?" "Yes," Jessica confirmed, her jaw tightening. "He handcuffed me with excessive force, shoved me into his patrol car, and detained me without providing a clear reason. He was retaliating because I dared to question him." A murmur ran through the courtroom, faces turning toward Ryan, whose expression was stony, his lips pressed into a thin line. Michael turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to present evidence obtained from a dashcam recording of the incident provided by a witness who observed the entire encounter." The defense lawyer shot up, his face flushed. "Objection! This evidence was not disclosed before trial." Michael's face remained calm. "The footage was recently obtained, but it is relevant and critical to proving Officer Caldwell's misconduct." Judge Turner leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Overruled. Let's see the footage." A screen descended at the front of the courtroom, the lights dimming. The video played, the dashcam's perspective showing Jessica's car pulled over, Ryan's aggressive posture as he approached her window. His voice was sharp, his tone dripping with condescension. license and registration. Now. The video continued showing Jessica complying, her voice calm and respectful. But Ryan's demeanor grew more hostile, his posture aggressive. Then the footage showed him ordering her out of the car, twisting her arms behind her back, shoving her roughly against the vehicle. There was no resistance, no aggression. Only a woman following orders while a man abused his power. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Faces turned to Ryan, eyes narrowing, whispers breaking out. Jessica watched his expression, how his jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with panic before he composed himself. But she saw it, the crack in his confidence. The video ended, the screen retracting, the lights coming back on. Michael turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this footage clearly shows that my client was compliant, respectful, and cooperative. Officer Caldwell's actions were unwarranted, aggressive, and an abuse of his authority." Judge Turner's eyes were cold as they settled on Ryan. "Officer Caldwell, would you care to explain your actions?" Ryan's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Ryan stood, his face hard. "Your Honor, the suspect—" "Her name is Jessica Thompson," the judge cut in, his tone sharp. "Address her by name." Ryan's face darkened. "Jessica Thompson," he corrected, his voice tight, "was uncooperative. She challenged my authority. She was confrontational." Michael's voice cut through the room. "You mean she asked why she was being detained?" Ryan hesitated, his mouth opening and closing. "She questioned me." Michael's eyes gleamed with triumph. "And for that, you arrested her? For asking a question?" Ryan's face reddened, his jaw clenching. "I did what I thought was necessary." Michael's voice dropped, his words slow and deliberate. "You abused your power because she challenged your ego." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Ryan looked away, his shoulders tense, his confidence shattered. Judge Turner's voice was cold. "Officer Caldwell, your actions were not just unprofessional, they were unlawful. This court will not tolerate abuse of power." Ryan's face fell, his posture deflating as the weight of the judge's words sank in. He was losing, and Jessica was winning. The gavel struck with a resounding crack, echoing through the courtroom as Judge Samuel Turner's voice cut through the tension. "This court finds sufficient evidence to proceed with the charges of misconduct, unlawful arrest, and abuse of power against Officer Ryan Caldwell. Furthermore, an internal investigation will be launched to review his conduct in previous cases." A murmur swept through the audience, a ripple of shock and satisfaction. Ryan's face went pale, his shoulders slumping as the weight of reality settled on him. The badge that had shielded him, protected him, now felt like a noose tightening around his neck. His lawyer's whispers were frantic, urgent, but Ryan barely heard him. His eyes were locked on Jessica, standing across the room, her posture straight, her head held high. There was no anger on her face, no hatred, just a cold, unyielding determination. She had won. The judge continued, his tone firm. "Until the conclusion of this investigation, Officer Caldwell is hereby suspended without pay. Should these allegations be substantiated, the consequences will be severe, including potential criminal charges." Ryan's heart dropped, his face flushing with humiliation. The whispers grew louder, eyes turning to him, judgmental and unforgiving. He was no longer the feared enforcer of the law. He was just another man who had overplayed his hand. The gavel came down again. "Court is adjourned." The room erupted into noise, reporters scrambling for their phones, murmurs of satisfaction, and the hushed whispers of disbelief. Ryan sat frozen, his body rigid, his mind spinning. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Jessica turned to leave, her shoulders straight, her expression calm. She walked down the aisle, reporters closing in, cameras flashing, questions shouted from every direction. "Jessica, how do you feel about the verdict? What message do you want this case to send? Do you think justice was served?" Jessica paused, her gaze steady as she looked directly into the cameras. "This isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been silenced, intimidated, or broken by abuse of power. It's about accountability. And today, power was held accountable." The reporters' voices grew louder, but Jessica didn't answer any more questions. She turned, walking out of the courthouse with her head high, her confidence unshaken. Outside, the sun was bright, warm on her face as she stepped down the courthouse stairs. She took a deep breath, the air feeling lighter, cleaner. She had fought back, and she had won. But it wasn't just her victory. It was for everyone who had been wronged, everyone who had been powerless. She had broken the cycle. She had stood up, refused to be silenced. Her phone buzzed, a text from Rachel. "You did it. You really did it. I'm proud of you." A smile broke through Jessica's calm demeanor, her shoulders relaxing. She texted back, "We did it. I couldn't have done this without your help." Rachel responded almost instantly, "I just did what was right. You were the one brave enough to stand up." Jessica looked back at the courthouse, the building that once felt like a place of oppression, now standing as a symbol of justice. It wasn't over yet. Ryan's investigation would be long, and there were other victims who still needed justice. But today she had made a difference. Today she had fought back, and Ryan Caldwell, he would never be untouchable again. Weeks later, headlines dominated the news. Officer suspended amid misconduct allegations. Abuse of power exposed, the downfall of Ryan Caldwell. Jessica Thompson's fight for justice sparks change. An internal investigation revealed a pattern of abuse in Ryan's career. Dozens of complaints buried, witnesses intimidated, reports falsified. His badge was stripped, his career shattered, and criminal charges loomed over him. But the story didn't end there. Jessica's case became a catalyst, inspiring others to come forward, their voices no longer silenced by fear. Her courage sparked a movement, a demand for accountability and justice. Jessica continued to fight, using her voice, her story, to bring awareness to the injustices embedded in the system. She became an advocate, standing beside others who needed their voices heard. Ryan Caldwell thought his badge made him untouchable, thought he could silence her, break her. But she was stronger than he ever imagined. And his power? It was built on fear, on silence, on abuse. Jessica destroyed it all. If this story moved you, made you think, or inspired you to stand up against injustice, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories just like this. Leave a like to show your support and comment below. Your voice matters. Let's continue to raise awareness and demand accountability. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice begins when we refuse to stay silent. Because justice wasn't just about winning a case. It was about changing the system. And she wasn't done fighting yet. If this story moved you, made you think, or inspired you to stand up against injustice, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories just like this. Leave a like to show your support and comment below. Your voice matters. Let's continue to raise awareness and demand accountability. Thank you for watching, and remember, Justice begins when we refuse to stay silent.